Why is everybody talking about semiconductor chips?
We can't live without TSMC, and if we were to lose access to it, we face the greatest disruption to global manufacturing since the Great Depression.
TSMC warns an invasion of the island would render its factory inoperable.
Taiwan semi stops for one day, the entire global situation would be in serious trouble. That's how important this company is.
Your world revolves around semiconductor chips.
台独分裂是祖国统一的最大障碍。
How Taiwan became the center of the world. When Neil Armstrong took his first steps on the moon in 1969, many around the world watched in awe of humanity's potential, others in fear of America's potential, few in suspicion of perhaps Hollywood's potential, and some didn't watch at all because they were Chinese and their government censored it. Had it not been censored though, most Chinese at that time couldn't afford a television. Those who could were often using that money to instead try to flee to Taiwan or the US, and even high-ranking officials were still riding bicycles to and from work. Inspiring as this breakthrough may have been for the United States, the intention behind the Apollo program was less about man's curiosity and desire to explore, and more about man's primal desire to dominate and control. And no one knew this more than those Chinese officials on their bicycles and their much wealthier counterparts in Taiwan. The technology developed by NASA would be used in other sectors, including, of course, the military. Rocket technology improved missile capabilities, satellites would give us GPS, and semiconductors would give us both the guided missiles that helped the US make the world's fourth strongest military, Iraq, look like a high school squad playing against major leaguers in the first Gulf War, and it gave us the digital revolution. As the old adage goes, winners write the history. Spin-off technology from the space race, primarily semiconductors, have given the US and its allies the militaries and economies to win. And big tech has given the West the ability to shape the narrative, and thus write the history. This is why when you turn on the news, you will often hear Europeans from North America, South America, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and even parts of Africa, the Middle East and Central Asia expressing outrage over China's practices of settler colonialism in Tibet or Xinjiang. Or you may hear Hong Kong's former colonizers advocating for their freedom, and even Israel's supporters who helped propagate the invasions of Iraq and Libya standing by the Uyghur Muslims of Xinjiang. But the loudest voices you will hear will come from the countries that officially recognize Taiwan as part of China, supporting Taiwan's right to remain independent from China. So why the hypocrisy? Because they can. Why can they? Superior technology. What makes their technology superior? Semiconductors. And who makes the most advanced semiconductors? Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, or TSMC. The story of TSMC starts with one of those Chinese trying to leave the country. Born in 1931, Morris Chang, in typical East Asian fashion, would be dissuaded by his parents from pursuing his dream of becoming a writer, and instead moved to the US in 1949, where he would study engineering at 3 Ivy League schools, and eventually end up with a PhD and a position as vice president of Texas Instruments semiconductor business. After 25 years with the business, Chang would decide to move to Taiwan, where he would revolutionize the industry by creating a company that only focused on semiconductor production. The fabless foundry model used by TSMC would help Taiwan surpass the United States in 2007 to become the second leading supplier of microchips in the world, behind Japan. And in 2020, TSMC alone would account for 54% of total foundry revenue around the world. What is a foundry? A foundry produces chips in a fabrication facility, or fab. These chips are then sold to other companies like Qualcomm, Apple, and Nvidia, and this model has allowed TSMC to leap ahead of companies such as Intel and Samsung, which make chips as well as the products they are used in. Unlike the US, Japan, and other tech superpowers, this small island of roughly 23.5 million is almost entirely dependent on this one industry, as it makes up 25% of its GDP. As of 2025, Taiwan accounted for 65% of global semiconductor production, and TSMC alone accounted for 53% of the global total. But as dependent as Taiwan may be on this one company, the rest of the world is even more dependent on Taiwan. According to Moore's law, the number of transistors in an integrated circuit doubles every 2 years. What this means for the industry is that even one bad year can ruin you. Low revenue means less money for R&D, which leads you falling behind even more and thus lower revenue, and the cycle continues. Morris Chang saw this and knew that with lower costs of labor, Asian companies would leap ahead of the US chip makers. The Taiwanese government also saw this. The Vietnam War, which lasted from 1955 to 1975, shifted the US's focus in the region, and with the successful explosion of China's first atomic weapon in 1964, along with official recognition of the PRC as a governing body of China and Taiwan, the Taiwanese knew they needed something to offer the United States in exchange for support. The Taiwanese government gave Dr. Chang an opportunity to test his idea, and in 1987, TSMC was born. With government backing, the company was able to lower its prices and gain market share. Their lowered costs would allow the soon-to-be giant to make deals with leaders in the tech industry and cause other fabs to go out of business, and tech companies that had manufactured their own chips to start outsourcing. The strategy has more than succeeded. It has made the entire world dependent on Taiwan's TSMC, but concerns do persist. Will Moore's law continue? TSMC has manufactured 2-nanometer chips, and the process consists of using lasers accurate enough to hit coins on Earth from the moon. And mirrors are used to reflect this light with surfaces so flat that if the mirrors were the size of the United States, the largest bump would be around a centimeter high. The manufacturing is being done on an atomic level and is testing the known laws of physics, and many think that we are reaching the limits of our manufacturing capabilities. Companies like Intel and Samsung do still remain in the passing lane, and with the passing of the CHIPS Act, the US has made its intention of catching up quite clear, and Sam Altman's potential $7 trillion investment could shake up the industry as well. Restrictions placed on China during the Trump administration have forced the Chinese government to invest in this industry, which has led to the growth of SMIC, which now makes 7-nanometer chips, and the government has the power to make Chinese companies like Huawei use homegrown semiconductors, which lead to accelerated growth. But the biggest threat of all remains the political one. Although Chinese history is quite complicated, the following 2 sentences can summarize 5,000 years of Chinese history about as well as any. When China is united, things are good. When China is divided, things are bad. As the Chinese media likes to say, under Mao, the Chinese people stood up. Under Deng, the Chinese people got rich. And under Xi, the Chinese people are becoming stronger. The Opium War kicked off the century of humiliation, which ended with the establishment of the PRC in 1949, after the victory over the Japanese invaders, and the Civil War victory over the Kuomintang, and their retreat to Taiwan. Now that China is wealthy and strong, it's time for them to be respected, and the successful unification of Taiwan plus Hong Kong and Macau will symbolize China's return to greatness. Key to understanding the importance of Taiwan to the mainland is understanding the importance of legitimacy to the PRC. When people in democratic countries don't like the government, they elect a new one. But if the Chinese people get too unhappy with theirs, this can lead to a revolution. Many from the West cannot understand why Chinese people tolerate a government where they don't have the right to vote along with other cherished freedoms by Westerners. But understanding the humiliation felt by the Chinese is crucial in understanding their desire for a strong government. If the PRC allows itself to get humiliated on a large scale, this will cause an unaffordable loss of legitimacy and could lead to their downfall. So what will happen to Taiwan and the semiconductor industry? Will they go the way of the Ukrainians in a proxy war where China overplays its hand and the West fights China to the last Taiwanese? Will they be able to balance the mainland and the West and serve as a bridge between cultures? Will Taiwan be slowly and successfully integrated with the mainland, thus showing the world China's return to its past glory and the superiority of the Chinese system over the Western one, with the Taiwanese willingly joining the mainland? And what will happen to the semiconductor industry? The only thing we can be sure of is that the good guys will win, because the winners will have the strongest military, and most developed tech industry will result in control over the narrative, and we will all be saying it's a good thing the West won the Second Cold War, or the exact opposite, but in Mandarin.